Yeah, and they know how to do layers and yeah. Okay, let me just picture that. All right, I just hit start broadcast. Oh, we're gonna start it now. Hold on, let me see if I can change that.
It's showing you can do. So I'm not doing it. Right.
Okay, I just sent it to your Gmail. I'm on. You're on? Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah.
I think that's fine. It's
Yeah. Are there extra?
Yeah, right in that bin.
It won't queue it up on here, but we can actually just change the view. Because I'm a little nervous that my pen tab was not working when I near it.
Oh, okay. This one. Change copy.
Like it's fine now, but like I need to see my desktop.
Right.
That's fine. Even if you can see the presentation on the side, that's fine.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Because he likes the presentation mode.
Right.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right, so if I can get you to stop what you're doing, please. And I want to welcome everyone back to another week again. It's a 4-day week. A couple of weeks ago, okay, headphones out, headphones off, please. All right, a couple of weeks ago, Derek was in, just scoping out the space, figuring out what you guys are capable of doing. And we had a discussion after, and I think you asked the question, what do you guys want to learn how to draw? And some students actually spoke up and said, superheroes. Awesome. So what we're going to do today is Derek's come in to actually teach you how to draw superheroes. And originally we were thinking about doing it on paper. But in the morning class, we're going to try it out with your black tablets. All right? We'll see how it goes. So you are to save this project when you're done. All right? You can just save it in your Unit 1 folder. Please do not just close the program and leave your file, all right? Because I will assess you that you actually worked in the workshop, participate in the workshop after. I don't care if it doesn't look great. I just want to make sure that you've done actually some work, right? And you want to done the neat hands after you're done. We are very honored to have Derek in here, Derek Bruckner from University of Manitoba and WAG Studio. Derek's actually, go online and Google him, you'll see his website, and he's I'm blown away by all the different workshops that you've given, and you've been council in Texas. You've done a presentation in Chicago, and New York. He's at New York?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's actually done quite a bit of work internationally, and we're honored to actually have him here to actually teach you guys how to do some drawing, because my drawing capabilities is right. So anyway, at this point I'm going to turn over to Derek, and you're on. I'll give you like a 10-minute notice when people are about to go. Okay. Right?
All right. So.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They hear you.
All right. Even if I'm not on that microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. So straight. So we're gonna do a few things, but before I get started, I just thought I would talk a little bit about my own work a little bit before we get into superheroes. Like I actually work a lot with the figure in my own work. You know, so there's a self-portrait of me, so I work, you know, I like drawing people a lot. I do landscape, but not very often, but I have done that. I've done drawing for CTV in the courtroom. So things like, you know, and I guess in a lot of ways my practice or my artwork comes a lot from drawing things in front of me, I think, and drawing from a lot of photographs, but I think part of it's learning how to draw what's in front of you first. And so I have this very extensive background in terms of drawing with non-digital material. Like when I went to art school, they didn't really even have computers. So I went to art school in the 80s and the early 90s. So the computers were just starting to come in. So there's always this kind of like combination of trying to sort of combine technology with the traditional. And I think that's going to be kind of an important thing to even think about today as we go through it. Like you guys, I'm from Winnipeg actually. I was born and raised here, went to high school in Winnipeg, did my degree at the University of Manitoba, and then I did a master's at Hunter College, which is part of the City University of New York system, and so did a master's there in New York City 25 years ago, and then came back to Winnipeg, and then periodically I go back to New York, and I said last 5 summers I've spent my summers there, and sort of keep tapped into that. But so anyway, so just to continue on with the drawings, so these are actual drawings that were televised in November 2008. And so I had to work very quickly, and actually in a lot of ways, like what we're going to talk about today is this idea that drawing is a layering process. So people tend to think about detail and wanting to get things perfect right away and all of that, whereas I don't really need you to sort of think about having detail and perfection right away, but it's about approaching the drawing in a layering or in a process that involves layers. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so those layers are going to be important to think about, and those different stages in terms of drawing are going to be important to think about. So that, first off, I mean, for those of you that are working digitally, you do have the Command Z, right? Which will sort of, anything that you do, you can sort of like say, no, scrap that or undo something. For those of you that are working in pencil, you've really got to just think about this idea in terms of a process that you're going to draw very lightly first, and then progressively go into darker line and more detail. I'm going to show some examples of that. But I often think about my own drawing in that way, in terms of that it's inevitable that I'm going to make mistakes. I'm just really good at hiding my mistakes. And so, you know, like we can see that there might be, like there's maybe a little bit of a mistake there, kind of, which I kind of left, I thought. But so these are kind of rough. I don't want to necessarily talk about which court cases these were, because they were kind of very sad stories, but like the Greyhound bus guy. And
Oh, really?
yeah, so, but, yeah, so, but anyways, but this is my recent work. This is something I've done like last summer. So I work with performance artists, and I work with like digital projection and environment and live video feeds. I try to sort of do sort of stuff in relation to that. So it's a little strange, a little surreal, but yeah, and then portraiture again, sort of more abstract stuff. Okay, so that's my work. But now I thought I would, and as a teenager, I drew comic books a lot actually, and so it's sort of like, you know, I've always worked with the figure, but it's kind of rooted in like drawing comics actually for me. And so this book that came out, I'd say it was like 1978, 77, and I've I kind of use this as a kind of a building block in terms of learning about drawing the body, thinking about composition, perspective. Like this book has a great chapter on perspective, actually. And you know, there's other things in there in terms of light and shadow, which we're not going to get into today. But I am going to talk a lot about this idea of the gesture drawing. And about this idea of like restating line and not worrying about too much detail right away, but thinking about basic shapes. And trying to sort of focus on the idea that you're starting with the torso area first, and then building your way around that. Now, if you look at most of these figures, nothing's symmetrical in terms of like there's usually a twist in the body. Like if you think about the rib cage is facing one way, and then the pelvis is facing another way, and usually one side of the body is stretched more, and the other side is maybe a little more compressed. So something to kind of think about with that. So here are just more gesture drawings. These are done very quickly, like they're almost kind of stick men, but they've just got a few things added to them. And so this is kind of like your beginning process. Thank you. Your beginning process in terms of how you think about drawings. Like you don't think about the fingers, you don't think about the facial features, you just think about the basic shapes that are there. So it's like rib cage, which can be kind of used as either a box or a circle, and we'll see different examples of that right there and there. Or sometimes it'll be more rectangular. So this is kind of like a stage that we can try and think about with the drawing. Now, whether you're working in pencil or with digital mediums, you're going to try to think about the drawing in terms of layers. Now, if you're drawing in pencil, you want to draw very lightly so that you're starting off with a sketch that's very, very lightly drawn. And then once you feel you've got some proportions which are kind of working, then you can begin to build it up. And then we won't get to this stage, but when you have a bit more time, then you start to layer in the detail. Like I'm thinking like realistically for our workshop today, probably if we can get from here to there, that would be great. You know, maybe if if I know you guys don't like homework, but maybe but maybe detailing this maybe on your own might be a way to think about this. So it's this idea of like that you're drawing with layers, or you're thinking about progressive steps in your process, right? And anticipating that in these processes that mistakes are going to be kind of inevitable, and that's okay, right? I will probably make some mistakes even in my demos, and that's all part of it, right? So I think for the people that are drawing, that are using pencil and paper, don't get too caught up with your eraser. Allow for a lot of restating of line, and that the paper becomes a record of that trial and error process of you trying to find the shapes that are working versus trying to jump to the finish stage, right? So like people are going to want to try and get to people are going to want to try and jump to this, but just try to stick to this for now and maybe work towards that, but try not to think about worrying about detail. So we're not necessarily jumping to the detail and to the perfection right away, right? But we're thinking more about these first two steps versus the third step that we're seeing in the images. Okay. And you notice that with the line drawing that it's very fluid and it's fairly rapid too. Like it's not this sort of like little tick 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 kind of line, like, but it's like a strong stroke, like a very fast fluid stroke, which takes a little bit of practice, but that's where maybe not worrying about whether the line is perfect, and so you're going to have lines that are going to be off. In some ways, I almost think it's better to even kind of like start like with this, and then you just start to put circles around the stick man, maybe even, and anticipating eventually that you start to think maybe in terms of tubes, perhaps, and then eventually you're joining the tubes. And then, you know, like this is for later stages, but that you start to think about the detail and then the shadow and highlights, right? Which we're not going to get. We won't get to these two steps today, but if we get to something like this today, that would be great.
Actually, that's really good. Remember last week, guys, we were talking about appeal to 12 principles of animation, right? In traditional animation, you don't want a lot of detail, right? You want a little bit of that overlap, but not too much detail when it comes to your traditional forms of animation, right? So just getting to that third level is probably suitable for this. And when you start working with layers, remember last week what we were doing as well when you're setting up your shape, so you're very familiar with this type of an approach. I was using that blue pencil, right? The blue stylus thing. That's kind of stuff that you may want to work on when you're doing this, right? So you give you multiple layers over top of each other.
Yeah, like I don't know if the people working in pencil have access to pencil cream. Maybe we should talk about this. But I'm thinking like, you know, that the people working in pencil, like if they had color pencils, they might start off with a yellow and then work up to an orange and then maybe go to their pencil with that third layer. Yeah. But here again, like just to talk about the gesture again, right? Like you can see that everything is completely asymmetrical. So you've got the hips kind of facing one direction. You've got the shoulders and the rib cage facing another direction, and then you've got the left leg furthest or closest to us. Then you've got the the left arm furthest away, right? And so you'll see that's a kind of a fairly common mechanism that they'll use in terms of that. You'll see like the arm and leg that are on the same side of the body would be actually the furthest away from each other. And then you've got the opposite happening and you've got the same thing happening with the other side of the body too, right? The right arm is furthest away from the right leg. Right? So you're always getting the pose is always very active and very expressive that way, versus this kind of stationary symmetrical pose as how we know the body in terms of medical diagrams or something like that, right? Yeah, so here's just another. Are you guys, your parents allow you to watch the Daredevil television series on Netflix?
Some of them.
I'm kind of excited. Season 2 is coming out very soon. But here again, like, so this is maybe skipping one of those stages, right? So we've gone away from like the gestural kind of first step, right? But we've kind of gone into those other steps. We can start thinking about the figure in terms of all of these kind of like tubes, right? And you can see that the rib cage is now maybe more of a box, right? And then the pelvis is more of a box too. And then, of course, those things rotate differently, so you can even start thinking about perspective that way too. And then I guess the other thing I like to talk about too is this idea that, you know, I think like superheroes, like particularly, you know, American versions of superheroes, I mean, are really coming out of this sort of like euro-centric kind of representation, right? So most of the superheroes are white, and so that which kind of becomes problematic, I think, in a lot of ways. Like I think we're starting to see now in the 21st century that, you know, that superheroes are coming from like a lot of different backgrounds, which I think is far more interesting. I mean, even like, you know, the X-Men in the late 80s, I mean, they had people like Thunderbird, which was, you know, Native American and things like that. And the other thing is, I guess, body types too, right? I think that, you know, like superheroes tend to sort of have these sort of like unrealistic bodies and hyper masculinized or hyper feminized, so that the women's waists are always super skinny and the men's waists are skinny, and, you know, And so I think like try to sort of be conscious of that, I guess, in some ways. Like I think like want to draw a superhero that's like, you know, kind of like big in size, or maybe doesn't have a skinny waist, or. So here's other ideas in terms of those boxes and tubes again, right? But this idea of like actually thinking about maybe in perspective too. So this is maybe more complex things to think about. And all these images that I'm showing you are actually I've gone online. If you Google how to draw the model or how to draw the marble way, most of these images you'll find online. So most of the book has been scanned and is online. Yeah, so I think this in some ways kind of relates to some of the things that Mr. Leduc was talking to you about. I think that was anticipation. I can't remember the stages of animation. It's like
we were just talking about appeal.
appeal. But so I think like these are kind of a good example here in terms of tension in a pose, and this idea that when you have like a strong twist in the pose, and there's this kind of anticipation of the figure about to spring into some sort of action, I think, and so there's this kind of almost like stored compression or stored energy prior to the figure sort of springing forward, and so I think like this example on the far right and far left are kind of showing good examples of that kind of strong tension in the pose, I think. Now, heads and hands are kind of like, and feet are kind of like worlds in themselves. And so you kind of, you know, to sort of get into the detailing of that, I think you have to think about breaking those down into kind of basic geometric shapes in some cases. You know, obviously, like the woman isn't bald, unlike me, but you know, you start with something before you worry about the hair. You start with just the idea of that, like no detail of the hair, for instance. Okay, now this is something that we're probably not going to get into today, but I thought I would just kind of share with you two scenarios. And this is also from the book as well, like how to draw the marble way, but you've got two examples in terms of how you're creating composition. So I've divided it with the red line, but if you start thinking about panel one there, which is, and so this is generally considered maybe the more weaker composition in some ways. And this one is maybe a little bit more dynamic. So if we think about image one compared to image one there, image two compared to image two here, image three compared to image three here. And so I talked about this thing about, like, look at, there's that twisting of the body that I talked about in terms of the left arm is further away from the left leg, and the right arm is, or pardon me, the right leg is coming forward, and then the right arm is back. And so there's that kind of twist again here, where here we sort of see something maybe a little bit more symmetrical and not really having that twist. And there's tension here, like Captain America is sort of leaning forward more, right? So all these things are sort of creating a more of a dynamic feel in the composition. And overall, like, we're seeing more angles and more curves, which create more movement. Like curves in shapes will tend to have a little bit more movement versus something straight up and down, right? Like, and then of course the progression of space there, all that. Here we can see that the strength of that punch in terms of, like, it just becomes way more dynamic than something like this. And even like with the villain or monster picking up Iron Man there, like even with the body not being as straight, like here it's very straight up and down, but here it's kind of like curving, and the arm and the hand is sort of expressive, allowing us to sort of flow back down. And then there's more of a bottom view here, which kind of creates a more dramatic effect. We're seeing more of the ceiling, and so all those sort of things become important things. Now, these are things that we're going to talk about today, but you know, like those of you that are going to storyboard, or working in film, like you're thinking about those sort of things, right? Okay, so, and then we've just got another, sorry, this is a little light, but another example here. So the left side is the weaker composition, the right side is more the kind of, I guess, kind of more expressive or dynamic composition on the right, which is interesting, right? So they have this argument, and everything's sort of straight on. I forget what type of view that would be called in the camera language, but here the camera views are much more dynamic in terms of variety and in terms of creating tension, like even in terms of, like, you can see, like, even the way the cigarette's been positioned versus here, right? What that's doing. And the viewpoint here in terms of like this versus that. And then the sort of the conflict that they're having, that the guy's pounding his fist and almost seems like he's pounding him into submission onto the table in some ways. And then here's, like, you can kind of see their disagreement, and he's like turning his back, or here this person's turning his back, but it's not really that obvious. But here the tension and the disconnect that they're having in terms of their argument is much more pronounced here, I think. And then it's interesting, like, not even seeing the person there in terms of just his cigarette and the guy walking out the door. It almost seems like the guy's more interested in the cigarette than talking to the guy. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop there. We're going to now go into our programs now.
Okay, so if you're using Flash, I would like you to set it up so that you have lots of white space, right? So increase the size of your stage. If you're using Photoshop, again, probably follow the stuff I set up here. And whenever Dirk's talking about layers, you can do the layer stuff Flash, right? And you already use brush for drawing.
Yeah, and if you've got any questions or something, or I've gone too fast, let us know. Okay.
And we are recording this, so if you want to go back, you can, right?
Oh, good. Yeah. Excellent. Perfect. Yeah,
No pressure.
No, that's fine. I would like a copy for myself. That's great. That's so cool. I like that.
So that's really good together right there.
Great. Okay, so anybody got a preference in terms of a pose they would like to draw?
How about something like this? No. Does anyone want to be a model? Vernon? No. Eric, you want to be a superhero model? How do you do a superhero pose? Eric will do a superhero pose.
Okay.
Maybe a Kingdom Hearts pose. Maybe, well, how about pretend that you're Spider-Man? Let's see, a serious Spider-Man pose. Anyone?
Okay.
Are you on incremental?
I can't see him. I'm going to have to.
Can you do a standing pose?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't see you, Eric.
What does Spider-Man do a lot?
Eric, can you just stand over there a bit, just more, just so, because I can't see you. Yeah, right there, perfect. Great.
There you go. All right.
Okay. So Eric, push your left elbow back and then your right arm forward. So just twisting your body like your right arm forward. Yeah, perfect. Just like that. Right? Okay, so see that pose here that we're talking about now? So you see, like, both arms and legs are kind of like separate, are really far away from each other, right? So the right arm is really far away from the right leg, and the left arm is really far away from the left leg. Okay? So let's just start off with a quick gesture here, and I guess you could use a paintbrush or a pencil. It doesn't really matter. We're not gonna, for Photoshop, you're not gonna have the line too thick. Probably, I would say probably 4 or 5 pixels maybe. Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. Oh, what's going on here?
Wait, what are you? It's in No, that's different. This is.
What my
You okay?
yeah, like I've gone into the brush and I'm not getting this. It's weird. It's like, of course it does this now.
What are you?
You just started a new document. Do you want to use the picture on your screen to put it up there, or
Sure.
like as
Sure.
reference?
Yep. Yep. So I've got just
All right.
so there.
Yeah, go in there, and I think keep on going down.
Okay.
How about taking that one there, and maybe just drag? Is that good?
Yeah, that's great.
Or would you want to use one of the other ones?
That one's pretty good. Let's try that one.
That one there.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
why don't you drag that one on your desktop? Perfect. Okay, and then with Photoshop.
So, let's focus.
I think you have a layer. Maybe why don't you just do a new layer?
No, I'm not judging that much. Just saying that.
So weird.
You just start over. What are you trying to drag in there?
I'm just trying to open it up, but I'll
Picture?
just try to open up
Here.
in Photoshop.
It's that one.
Okay.
It's clear that like this.
There you go.
Okay. So, right, I'm still having trouble with. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Good. Okay. So now what we can do is just you can have another layer for each stage of the drawing. So I'm going to start with layer 1 and just do something very gestural-like. So we're going to use Eric almost sort of as a stick man in some ways. How do you feel about you drawing yourself, Eric? You okay? Okay.
Yeah, he's okay.
Okay. Okay. So let's just think about this idea in terms of, okay, so we're starting, and I'm just going to use a red, just emphasizing the idea that you want to start with something a little bit lighter, particularly for those of you that are working in pencil. I mean, you could work, any color you want, maybe just something that's would be lower in contrast. But so we're thinking about that torso area, right? Just kind of a very rough, kind of sketchy sort of thing, right? Where it's kind of it's almost like we're working with oval shapes in some ways. Right. So I'm not getting too kind of technical with it, right? So
Just
yeah. Okay, so it's kind of just anticipating that this leg is closer and this arm is closer, and sort of anticipating that. We're thinking that this side of the body is closer to us, and then the hips, it's in some ways it's the other way. Now maybe I've drawn them a little bit too big, and so if you're using pencil, what you could do is just get another piece of paper and just attach it on, I guess. But I'm gonna go in here and I'm just gonna shrink the layer here a little bit just to reduce the scale here. So bring him down a little bit, and then I don't know if you can do that faster than that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there's kind of like our first layer. Maybe we'll just put some feet on him and a head, and then we're kind of done in terms of that first layer.
Try to repeat the exact same thing, right?
I mean, you know, some of you may want to jump to to things sooner, but I think overall you're thinking about just the basic shapes and stuff that we're doing. In terms of perspective, right? Like you've got the tiling, which kind of gives us a vanishing point too, which sort of sets it, and the tables, and so we've got a vanishing point that's probably going to do something like that. And the ceiling, right? That's going to like a vanishing point that way. It's a little extra information, maybe too much for this point. Okay, and then we start thinking about the hand and the arm. And there's some foreshortening that's going on there, which is a little bit more difficult to do. But we're anticipating that the arm is going to get wider, but it's also going to get a little bit shorter here in terms of that, because we're viewing it kind of as a foreshortened view. Do they know what I mean by kind of foreshortened?
No, I don't know.
Okay, okay. All right, and then we're going to try and think about the hand in terms of just the mitten shape, kind of. So it's almost like we don't see his fingers, but we just think about the mitten sort of shape, and then the other hand will do the same thing. And then, of course, the head will just be a circle. Right. So it's kind of like our first kind of step. Okay, so I'm going to go to another layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just lighten that a bit. So we've got kind of a basic groundwork to work with here. And so going back to the people using pencils, this is why you kind of want to draw fairly lightly. And we might start to maybe accentuate some of the things a little bit, like bend the knees a little bit more, little things like that that we can kind of maybe play around with a bit. And I think now we're going to go back into maybe that more of that type of, we could just go back to here for a second.
I'm just walking around the room
Uh-huh.
and looking at the students, and I think when most of these students have been doing drawings before, they start off more with the we have on the left-hand side.
This thing here?
Yeah, I'm wondering, is there a way of doing that drawing?
Sure. Sure, absolutely.
I think some of them are struggling with the
Okay, sure.
the oval approach.
Sure.
It's looking like a kingpin somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe just on the right hand side,
Yeah.
to show how to set this up.
Okay, so let's start, like we'll create another layer here, and then we'll put that one maybe
Yes.
okay, so we'll turn off that. So maybe we'll consider this part as like maybe the second stage or something. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's go back to Eric again. And in some ways, like if we think about almost like the skeleton structure in some ways. So we think of things like the spine and the bones in the arm and the bones in the legs. We can think about that. So
I guess I used to say I'm not used to.
So let's just start with this thing. So
What? Oh, you mean diapers? Oh, diapers.
I can't. It's not, okay. Okay. All right. Sorry. All right. So we've got basically almost a spine in some ways. I'll undo that. So just a spine in like that. Okay. And then we can start thinking about pelvis area, maybe shoulder areas. And then lines. You've got the knee. I think one like that. Maybe reposition the shoulders that way. And then you've got the arm and the bending of the elbow there, and then the hand, bending of the elbow there. Actually, I think the elbow will probably go back here. So there's one of my first mistakes there, right? So he's got 3 arms, but right. But so you've kind of got a situation like this now.
Does that make sense for some of you guys? Yeah. Thank you, Derek. Or just wait.
Yeah, I think, you're asking me, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. What's his name? Matt. That's a good question, Matt, but just wait till we get to maybe to the later stages. 'Cause I'll talk about that in the later stages. Yeah. So yeah, it's tricky there, right? That's what you're thinking about, eh, Matt?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of like our first layer. And then we get to the second layer here. And so let's just pull that. So I'm going to just reduce the opacity of that. Push that back. And then we'll bring this one up a little bit. And so we now sort of build onto that, right? So we get to that. So let's just go back to the earlier layer. So I'm gonna do it again. I'm just gonna layer over that. Okay, so now I'm going to think about the rib cage area, and we can go back to it either being kind of like a oval type of shape, or we can start thinking about it more as a box. But we're now going to sort of get to this kind of stage here, right? But think about, like, you know, do we approach it more like a box, or do we approach it more organic, where it becomes a little bit more of a curving type of thing? Either one is fine, depending on what you want to do. So it's kind of like we're just kind of roughly doing it, right? Kind of anticipating. You know, if you're working in pencil, you want to be drawing lighter than what I'm doing. I'm drawing darker just so we can see it in the projection. And then we've got like the curve in there to there. Anticipating that this leg is going to go back further, so it's going to be maybe a little bit smaller. And the knee is going to be up a little bit higher than the knee here. Right? So that's kind of talking about perspective in a very slight, kind of subtle way. Okay, now we can also think about this idea of collarbone too, and center of the chest, whether it's female or male, but just think about that everybody has a collarbone. Right? And then the neck muscle, the head will probably shift in size. Okay, so now let's get to the arm. And so let's think about the shoulder and the bicep and tricep areas, so that part of the arm. Okay, now to answer Matt's question about the foreshortening. You know, maybe I'll zoom up in here just to kind of give us an idea in terms of to kind of talk about that. So what's happening in the foreshortening here is that if we look at the image here, and Eric, I'm just going to zoom up on you a bit here. Okay, so let's have a look at Eric's arm there. So first thing that we can think about with that is that the arm is quite wide because of that viewpoint, right? So, because what's happening now is that the arm is layered in a different space. So this part of the arm is much closer to the viewer of the camera than, let's say, the torso area is, right? We can see like the hand is bigger, everything's bigger, so the scale becomes bigger. The other thing that starts to happen is that the shoulder gets hidden by the bicep, and then the forearm kind of covers part of the bicep. So there's a stacking of volumes in front of each other, right? So let's break it down simply in terms of the figure here, okay? So we think about that first kind of tube sort of shape that's there, and I'm kind of just roughly really kind of drawing that in, but so there's that first tube, right? See that? And then that other tube becomes kind of wider and bigger but shorter, and then it stacks in front of that, right? But the wrist is still pretty wide. And then we got the hand kind of overlapping in front of the wrist area and that forearm area. And so we'll draw the thumb in. It's a good expressive thumb there. It's very nice. And then at this point, we won't worry about the spidey sort of fingers and the detailing of that. But we'll just think about it more as a mitten shape for now. Okay. We could think about the rib cage a little bit, maybe we want to. We could think about that. Uh-oh. Jamie, I forgot my power adapter. Do you have a power adapter for this? I can't believe I forgot that. Oh, it's ridiculous. Okay. All right, so any questions about the foreshortening of that arm? Did that help, Matt?
Yeah, it helped a lot.
Okay. All right. Now the other arm is a little bit easier because part of the body is covering a lot of the arm, and it's kind of like it's sort of like how we know and expect the forearm to be. Like there's no foreshortening, and it's kind of like it's a profile view. But I think, like, you know, we're anticipating maybe that, like, we sort of get an idea in terms of what the wrist is doing. Like, Like, I think part of the key is that you sort of describe the joints for each bend in the arm and in the legs. And so you're thinking about the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder, the knee, the ankle. Those become kind of important things to think about. Okay. How are we doing so far? Am I going too fast, or is that right? Is that okay? How are you guys doing? What's that? Awful. Fantastic? Okay. All right. You can see though, right? I mean, you guys have seen my drawings, right? You know that I can draw, but it's kind of like you have to think about those first layers in terms of that. And this is the thing, right? Like, this is the thing, like, we want to judge the drawing right away, right? You're thinking, oh, it's like, you don't judge the drawing at this point. Give yourself a break, right? Try to relax. Don't think, like, you have faith it's going to work out, right? We're still like, we still got a few layers to go. 10 minutes left, okay. Okay. So maybe we'll you know, like, box it in a little bit, but. All right, so let's work on the knees here a bit. Let's do that. Just a little bit. So all right, so you're gonna have one tube that's gonna go this way, right? We think about that, right? So we can actually see the bottom of the tube here. Here we won't see the bottom of the tube here, but we'll see the top of the tube there. Right? I don't see, you don't have to draw this, but I'm just trying to illustrate to you the idea that in terms of the direction of the tube that you're facing, right?
There's no right. Ladies and gentlemen, I just think to remind you something about art. There's no right or wrong, right? Right now you're just layering in a plan. You can revise the plan. You guys are doing a wonderful job.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Don't be really hard on yourself. This is just setting up the structure. Right?
Yeah, like it's really about building a foundation, you guys. It's not about trying to jump the details, not about trying to make it perfect. Right?
Uh-oh.
We're just thinking about basic shapes. Super basic shapes. And I'm looking at some of the drawings, I'm seeing, like, actually your line is far more fluid than mine, actually. Like, your line is pretty good. Yeah. So, okay, so let's go to the lake. All right, so now we get to here, and it's like maybe we see a bit of the top of the tube, and then we take it down. We don't see the bottom of the tube there at all. Here we're going to see a lot of the tube, at top of the tube. And it's going back into the space, so it's going to become shorter. And there's some foreshortening on there too as well, right? Here there's a little bit of foreshortening there, but here we're kind of seeing that part of the leg is kind of like as we would see it. Not really much foreshortening happening there. Okay? So there's kind of like where we're at now with the figure, I think. So let's go to like another layer. Let's try to clean it up a little bit, maybe bring in a little bit more detail. Not too much. We don't want to get carried away, but we're going to just kind of bring in a little bit more detail. How much more time, Jamie? Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be enough to kind of. All right, so I'm gonna reduce the opacity of that just to, of course it's not working for me. So you can see there's a lot of scribbling there. There's a lot of mistakes. There's, you know, it's not perfect at this point. So I'm going into a new layer now. We're going to take over that and try to sort of build from what we've got here. and start thinking about which lines am I going to choose, right? So we've got some lines, like I think we've gone up too far here, maybe down here is too low. And I'm going to maybe switch to another color here just to just so we can kind of see it a little bit clearer. We ready? Okay, here we go.
It's the spot. Very nice. That's good. I know, but like, that's good. It's not shit, man. I know.
Okay, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to maybe have him crouch a little bit more. So I'm going to bring the legs up a bit.
Wow.
And I'm going to bend the knees a little bit more. You don't have to do this, but I'm just trying to create a little bit more tension in the figure. So we start to see Eric gradually transforming into Spider-Man. And maybe we'll drop the head down a little bit more, just to kind of get that kind of more confrontational sort of view. And if we think about the hands again, like in terms of what he's done there, so let's just go back to that. So let's think about those first two fingers in the center there. And if we think about the knuckles, we're seeing that this knuckle is higher, right, or bigger. And then there's like an angle. And yeah, so this is what's really tricky here, right? So we have like, the foreshortening of the finger, right?
That arm, the left arm. It makes it look so easy to do it.
Just zoom into that area a bit. Getting a little pixelated, but. All right, so with these two fingers, we really see more of the tip of the finger and not a little bit of the nail. And then we're seeing a little bit of the palm in there. Here the finger is, we see maybe more of the top of the finger, but not much. So there's like a little bit of the nail. I'm drawing it very roughly still. Right? And then here we barely see any of the finger at all, right? Like it's kind of like, you just see the end, there's a little bit of the nail there, a little bit of the knuckle, and that's kind of it. And probably I could have drawn it bigger. Now, I haven't done this, but one of the things we could think about would be line weight differences, and maybe the line could be thicker and a little bit more careful there to sort of push that out, and the lines could be thinner. So we haven't talked about that at all yet, but we might go into another layer and redo this again. But all right, so let's see here. Let's just try and move. Okay. So try to, let's see here, so we can see Eric's hand there. Okay, this hand's a little bit easier. We don't have the foreshortening of the fingers, thank goodness. Okay, so we got a thumb there. And the viewpoint of the hand is a little different. Now we're seeing kind of a little bit more of the side of the fingers here on this side. So And this finger is stacking. The one I'm drawing now is in front of this finger here. So we're gonna, this becomes a little bigger and we'll see more of it, right? That makes sense? And then we get to the other knuckles there. So we see the finger going down there. There it's a little bit more foreshortened here. The other finger we can just sort of stick out there. You can stick out there and there's, you know, you could bend the finger a little bit.
Remember, this is not finalized, right? So it's
Yeah.
okay to mess it up. Like if a finger doesn't look like a finger, that's fine.
Yeah.
You can layer it in on here. Unfortunately, folks, that's going to be it for the class. I think I'm so impressed by all of your artwork that you're creating. Could you please make sure that you say that as first name, last name, underscore activity 3. Right? First name, last name, underscore activity 3. Give it to Flash. It'll be a block file. They have the link files. In Photoshop, it'll be a PSD or Photoshop document. Please say it. You may want to show Derek. And actually, why don't we give Derek a big round of applause for that? Derek will be around this afternoon for the animation class. So if you guys are here, if you want to jump back in and do it again, you can.
Yeah, and you know, I don't think if they want to email me, ask me stuff, they feel free to.
Actually, I'll put your email address on the.
Yeah. If I could just leave with one parting word.
All right, listen up, please.
Just one thought to think about before you leave. Try to think about drawing as a process and the idea that, well, not every drawing is going to work out. The drawings that don't work out, can you say to yourself, what did I learn from that drawing that I can apply to the next drawing? I think that's going to be the most important thing to think about with the drawing. You know, not everything is going to work out in terms of a product, but can you walk away from that process of that drawing and try to utilize the mistakes and the information you've learned to apply to your other drawings? I think that's an important thing to think about. I'll end with that.
Awesome. You guys have any questions, please feel free to approach Derek. Maybe you want to, Derek, just walk around and get some of the artwork. It's awesome. And then there's
Yeah. Oh, you're good. You do this on your own.
I cannot believe how great your drawings are. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, more patience, eh? Patience is yeah, that's the other thing. Patience is it's a bit, but you know, it's like something that I have to develop. It's not 6